is ended. The Atari 8-bit podcast.
Each game developer had a room, and the more successful ones had checks on their door, which were their royalty checks. So there were checks there, $200,000-$300,000. Yeah, it was rough. I'd still say that programming for the 2600 was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. We called California, hey, are you our boss? And no. Are you our boss? No.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Mitch Balsam was hired at Atari to work as a game programmer for the Atari 2600 and worked on an unreleased game called Electric Yoyo. Later, at Atari Research in New York, he worked on more unreleased products, including The Graduate, an add-on computer keyboard component for the Atari 2600, and a buildable robot toy. At Scholastic, he developed educational software titles for the Apple II computer. This interview took place on April 3rd, 2016. Where are you located?
I'm located in New York City. New York.
Nice. It's a hell of a town.
It's a hell of a town. The Bowery's up and something's up and the Bowery's down. What I like to say about it is it's a place so great they named it twice.
Right. Yeah. I love to. My wife and I love to go out there, and we'll stay in just Manhattan, and we'll be there for 5 days, and we'll see 8 Broadway shows in that time.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's super good.
Atari.
So Atari. Please tell me the story before the story. I'd like to know how you got interested in computers,
sure,
how you ended up at Atari, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So when I was in college, they had something that was thought of as a computer. It was really just a giant box the size of a refrigerator, a PDP-11, and I just wandered into there from during my coursework. I just walked into the computer lab and just decided it was an interesting place. And
where was this? What college?
Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. So I remember I was typing a basic program, and I was sort of drumming my fingers on the table. And a guy next to me said, "Would you please stop playing that music?" And I was like, "Playing what music?" And he was referring to my drumming of my fingers, and he was a early computer audio engineer type. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I was hitchhiking back to New York, and these guys picked me up from, I think they were at MIT, and we were all into this adventure game at that point, and they told me about this secret back door into the adventure game. So I wrote it all down, and
just Colossal Cave or something.
Oh, I don't remember. It was, and then we went back to school, and one terminal typed XXZZY, another terminal typed something else, and then boom, we got into the back door, and I was hip with the admins, and that was my early experiences. I left school, and I wound up at Baruch College in New York City, and there was a program for blind students, and we built a CAD/CAM sort of system to build raised line maps for the blind, and it was with a very early microcomputer, and there's a CNC milling machine and stuff like that. And I was really the only one who was into the microcomputers there. Then I met a fellow named Jim Kornthal, and he said, "Hey, I just got this great job. Maybe you want to join me." And I said, "Where?" And he said, "Atari." And I said, "Wow, that sounds interesting." So 3 days later, I was hired. And then we were sent to California immediately for our indoctrination and training. And that's when I saw the whole Sunnyvale campus and met all the people there.
Nice. So this was 1981 or so?
1980, yes, probably 1981 or two, yeah.
So you were hired to do what?
So I was hired to write games. I didn't, I had played plenty of games. Mostly, I played a lot of pinball, and we played some early video games. I wasn't really into Pong, but the other ones I was into: Asteroids, Robotron, Breakout, stuff like that. So I was there to learn and to learn about games and build them for the classic game console, the 2600 game console.
Nice. So I know that you worked on the graduate computer, and we'll get to that. But what other games did you work on?
So I guess the interesting thing about the Sunnyvale campus was, so it was a typical Sunnyvale building, and you walk in, and the first thing you would notice is that each game developer had a room, and the more successful ones had checks on their door, which were their royalty checks. So there was sort of a pecking order by how much so there were checks there, $200,000-$300,000. Several people had $200,000 checks listed on the wall. And then what we did was we got some training, and then we went back into the video game arcade that they had, which was a whole bunch of coin-op machines in a big black room with no lights, and you just sort of wandered around playing games for hours. And sometime that week, I'm not sure if it was that week or the next time, I went there. You got to pick which game you wanted to work on. So there were some games the marketing people wanted developed, and then there were other games that were sort of open. So I picked one called Electric Yoyo, which was a knockoff of it, which was a Japanese coin-op game. And it looked pretty challenging to develop for.
Had you experience before programming for the 2600?
No, never. Yeah, it was rough. I'd still say that programming for the 2600 was probably the hardest thing I've ever done, partially because it was at the beginning part of my career, and secondly, it was real-time assembly language programming with hardware-assisted debugging, which was challenging. And the environment was very challenging to develop for. Let's see. Then, so we worked on that for. I was involved in that for probably 8 or 9 months. We got comments back from the marketing people, like things like, "Well, we want more colors," and we would say, "Well, there are no more colors. The machine only has so many colors." And so we would. I got about. It took a good year or 8 months in the beginning to build a game. Sometimes it took a month or so just to get the first screen up, the first display running. But we got about, I think I got about 70% into it, and then we got sort of sidetracked by Mr. Kornthal came back again with another interesting opportunity for us. But so we went back to New York, and we were working under this guy named Steve Mayer, who was at that point sort of running Atari because of all the corporate shakeups and the need to be close to Warner Communications, now Time Warner. So we were working for him. He was an engineer, which was nice to work for an engineer. And it was sort of it was a research environment. There were all kinds of there were three game developers in the let's see, yeah, three game developers, and then there were numerous other teams working on a variety of different projects. There were some hardware projects, some pure research projects, and that's about it.
So Electric Yoyo was not released?
Was not released, correct.
When I Google around for it, I search for Atari 2600 Electric Yoyo. I keep finding this other game called Elk Attack, which was released for the 2600, which is a clone of Electric Yoyo.
Yes. So what that Elk Attack was, my friend Mark Hahn, who probably took my source code and released it. So Mark was fervent developer, and he we had this joke at the time about elk. I don't know what the source of it was, but it was a lot of joking about elk, and so he turned the game into Elk Attack, I guess.
Nice.
I remember he lives up in New Paltz, New York, and I remember we were into it was a challenge. How could you build a game development system without having your PDP-11 or your VAX, compiling your assembly language code. So he had a Compaq K-Pro, I think, and he had a whole development environment up there. So that's where we all got thrown out of Atari. That's where he went and started writing 2600 games.
Nice. Okay, so you got this other opportunity to go to New York and work in the research department?
Yeah, so I was in the Atari Research in New York, and so that was game development, and there were some other projects. So a couple of the other people that I remember there was sort of the mad scientist of the group, which was a guy named John Zeno, and he was a great guy, extremely intelligent, and I think he went to Harvard, and I don't even think he studied electrical engineering, but I remember all of the classically trained engineers would stand on one side of the room, and they'd say, well, he'd describe a circuit, and they'd say, that's never going to work, and he pushed a button, and sure enough, it worked. And the reason why, you would say that is that at the time, chip count was everything. So, you wanted to build these games at a price that people could afford. So they had to do a lot of creative things to reduce the chip count. And Steve Mayer, my boss, was the king of that. He was like, how can we build this thing with, 20 less gates or 30 less this? And then, that was their thing. So there was that project. So John Zeno would always build everything with less chip counts. And then they had an actual holography laboratory there. I don't know what they were planning on doing with that. I remember seeing the holography running a couple times with the giant table and the lasers. And they had a group of musicians that were, I think they had just seen these audio engineering systems, these sampling systems, and they wanted to build things like that for commercial use. So, we had big equipment there. We had VAXs and things. So it wasn't only microcomputers. And then they were also building at the other end some of the so when they built, I think, the 7800 or game systems like that, they would sometimes, the New York guys got a chance to build them. So there was that group there. And then I remember there was a CD-ROM authoring project where, Philips was involved. And then there was another project we were building robotic toys. They bought some. They were thinking of buying some company in Germany that had something. It was something like Lego Mindstorms. And so, we spent an entire weekend with, boxes of pizzas, and there's thousands of these robotic toys sort of trying to build interesting things that would wind up on the back of the box for the, what you can build with this robotic toy set. I don't remember what happened with that.
That sounds super interesting.
Yeah, that was fun at the time. This was so early on that no one had seen anything like this before. So that
Right.
was Atari Research. Oh, and Steve Mayer was moved to New York because his wife was working for Children's Television Workshop. So that
Right.
was the main reason why we were in New York.
Wow. All right. So you worked on the robot thing, which never panned out.
Yeah.
It's research, so a lot of stuff isn't going to pan out.
Exactly.
But, yeah. And
basically nothing that I did got to market. Unfortunately, that was one of the big downers. Was nothing really got to market. There was a lot of trial ups and downs, and then the budget crunch came in, and nothing really got out.
Right. And so you worked on the graduate computer, which was a keyboard that hooked up to the 2600. Tell me all about that.
Right. So Kornthal decided that there were a lot of Atari 2600 consoles at that point. I mean, somewhere in the 10 or 20 million range, and don't quote me on that number, but there was a lot of them. And so the idea is that if they could add something onto it, sort of an add-on, they would have a built-in 10% of 20 million. It's a lot of units. So that's the way they looked at it. Let's add something on to the 2600. And so that was a little bit easier said than done. 2600 was a very limited architecture, 6507, right? So it only had 4K of ROM space and 128 bytes of memory, no video display, and no bitmap to write graphics into. You had a single line, or actually half a scan line of space to draw your graphics in, and then you had to flip it around based on the timing. But they had a way of adding this processor on top of the in the game cartridge slot, and sort of overrided some of the signals, and they had a more capable processor in this game console. And there was a full keyboard, and we had Microsoft Basic, which I got to compile, and so we actually got the source code from Microsoft Basic for 6502. We recompiled it, tested it, and then we started writing the basics of an operating system. And we were responsible for bringing out a bunch of games too. So we were, so there was, I was working on Donkey Kong. There was another group working on Robotron, if you could believe it. That was really rough, really difficult to do, considering all those graphics and the limited player missile command, abilities of the 6502.
Mm-hmm.
So, even though you had this additional computer riding on top of it, you still had to use the 6502 graphics. The Stella graphics.
Right.
So, so we were playing with things where the trick was on the in the 2600 was, you had to read from an area in ROM and then write into the registers of the video display controller, and then you would have to do this in a very quick sequence, because basically you had one scan line, and you had to constantly sync up to the beam of the television.
Right, chasing the beam the whole time.
Right, yeah. So you had so many cycles to do things, prepare things for the next scan line, and so you hit this location, it sort of stopped the processor, and then waited for you to be in complete horizontal sync, and then you let it go, and then you had to fill registers with values, which would just fill one half of the screen, and then after those things had been displayed, then you would read from other locations and write into those registers again. So when the video hardware started reading it, it would write it out again with the new values, and then you had to do some, you were always trying to pre-calculate things in advance, reading from tables. So you were data driving all parts of the display. So the hardest thing was read, write. And this graduate computer allowed us to just go write, because we had this indexing technology in the chips, in the game console, in the computer console. So we would go write, and the hardware would read from some location and allow us to write, and that's how we got the higher res displays. That's how you actually could make a full bitmap, which would have, let's say 40 by 24 characters, and you could make a terminal because you weren't reading and writing, you were just writing, and moving the player missile graphics across the screen. And that's something that we worked on for a while, and there was hardware and software, and it was challenging, but we got something working in the end. So
nice. In my research online on this, it says there was this company. It really makes Atari sound unreasonable. It said there was this outside company called Peripheral Visions Incorporated that worked on it, and then Atari kept asking for more and more to be added to the project. And how does that work in with what you're telling me?
Well, Peripheral Vision were the guys in Pennsylvania that made the Commodore PET and the Commodore 64. They were actually the hardware engineers from there, and So what happened is that I don't know. I guess Kornthal met with them, and some other people met with them, and they knocked out a little design, and then we eventually got development systems, which were wire wrapped boards that would emulate what the chips, the gate arrays would eventually do when they got them all fabricated. So we had these development systems that were pretty primitive and pretty buggy. So like one thing you'll find interesting was I would notice that in the morning I would be able to write a program and everything would look fine. And then in the afternoon I started noticing errors. And I was like, what the hell is
heat?
It works in the morning. Yeah, exactly. So I brought one of my friends in and I said, look, I have this magic coating dust. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, look, I have this magic coating dust. It fixes your bugs for you. I go, how? Well, it was a can of compressed air, and you turn it on the side, you get the liquid to come out. So I'd go around the wire wrap board and I'd hit various chips with this, with the liquid, with the, super cooled air. And eventually the bug would just disappear from the screen. So it was a heat-related bug. So that was fun.
Nice.
Yeah, and so Atari asking for more and more things. Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably because we were trying. There was a vision of what the thing would be. I mean, it would be my first computer. So my first computer needed a display, right? It needed a real display, and that was probably one of the harder things. And then the other part of it is that how do you, if you're not just writing a game, how do you, do anything? So you have the 192 scan lines, then you have the overscan in which to do your calculation. So, how do you do anything when half the time you're just chasing the beam around? So I don't remember any crazy asks that they were making. I do remember, right before we went to Consumer Electronics Show, we went down. So we had built all the software and the games. They had built the LSI stuff, and we were going to go mate it all together. So we went down to Pennsylvania, and we sat in a room with 10 of their engineers and 10 of our engineers, and then like we plugged it all together, and it didn't work. So we were like, uh-oh, what are we going to do? So they finally got it to work and something to run. And I remember what it was we had this really nice, colorful Atari logo, and it would sort of the screen would roll. So you had the logo there, but it would roll. And so it was like, it was of no use. So, the hardware engineers are screaming, the software engineers are screaming back, and everyone's screaming at each other. And, and it's, this was like 2 days before CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, which everybody lived and died by. And then two of their engineers decided, oh, wait a second, there must not be enough power. So they wired up two of these transformers in parallel, in parallel. And they plugged it in, poof, it started working. Not poof bad, poof good.
Huh.
So instead of serial, they wired two transformers together in parallel. They plugged it in, and bam, it was rock solid, the display. So that was the end of that.
Wow. So
then Jim and I took it, and we got on a plane, and we went to Chicago, Consumer Electronics Show, and we went to the Atari booth, and there was, it was like 12 hours before the event opened, and there's all these union guys roaming around drinking coffee, and the booth is half disassembled, and we found our little console. So also, we didn't have, it wasn't a complete LSI. It was a sort of the next step of emulation. So we still had a big box under the table. So we had a nice little box on the table that was bolted down. And then below that, we had a, mess of wires and various boards, all stacked up. And that was it was a common practice at the time because, they didn't want to, they were sort of market testing it, seeing how people would react. And before they made the big investment in the chip factory in Japan to burn all these VLSI chips. So that was one of my favorite stories of going down there and fighting with the hardware engineers.
Nice. But
they were pretty accomplished guys. I mean, these are the guys that built the PET and the Commodore 64. So there was a fair amount of back and forth there. Our first development system was delivered as a PET, as a Commodore PET.
Really?
Yeah, with a box next to it.
Huh. Oh. Nice. Well, that's unfortunate that never made it to market.
Yeah.
But
so we got this new office. We had our own office in the MetLife Insurance Building on 14th Street. We had a whole floor because there were certain security precautions they wanted to take, and that no other people would get in, and there was a guard downstairs and all that. So we had our own office, and we went to the Consumer Electronics Show, and then we came back, and our boss was not there. Kornthal was not there, so we didn't really know what was going on. And I remember we're all sitting in the conference room, and this was during the video game meltdown of the 83, 82 time frame. And we know that there are various groups of Atari people getting laid off, but we don't seem to be one of them. So we're sitting there doing our thing and finishing our games, and one of the guys was reading in the Wall Street Journal about an interview from one of the Time Warner guys, and he talks about how the Atari Graduate computer was that effort has been disbanded. And we're like, really? Disbanded? Oh. So then, no one's bothering to call us. So we don't really have we're getting checks, and no one's calling us, and we call the California, hey, are you our boss? And no. Are you our boss? No. Okay. So we kept getting checks, and then we're all arguing one day about who's going to, everyone, we were all sort of late risers, so we would work, start at 11 and continue till 10 at night or whenever. So I remember we're all arguing about who was going to be in the office at 9 o'clock in case California calls us.
Mm-hmm.
And then one guy said, well, California is not getting up until noon our time, so why do we even need to be here? And we're all arguing about that. And at that time, we get a call from Atari HR, who said they were going to come visit us. So you're like, uh-oh, here it comes.
Here it comes, yep.
So that was that.
And they...
Yeah, and they didn't fire us. They riffed us. Reduction in force. So we were let go with I wouldn't say not a severance package, but a couple of weeks, a month or two of salary, and but
I'm surprised they showed up in person to do that, and then didn't just fire you over the phone.
Yeah, well, essentially they did. We knew it was coming.
Yeah,
but,
sure. Oh. Yikes.
Yeah.
So after that, you taught 6502 assembly language at like a continuing education
thing?
So tell me about that.
Kornthal had this job at the New School in New York, which is it's accredited college. So he taught that 6502 assembly language class, and Mark Hahn taught it for a while, and then I taught it for a while. So it was just the basics of assembly language programming for, at that point it was the Apple or the Atari, because no one could really write 2600 games because they didn't have the emulators and,
sure. Right.
All that equipment. So it was, I met a lot of people. It was nothing really. It was the basics of assembly language programming to novices. So it was fun.
So this is 1982 to 1984. Who was taking the class at that point? Was it geeky little kids? Was it just who?
There was a combination of math nerds and some people who got Apple computers. There's basically people who got Apple computers and realized that you couldn't do much with BASIC. And to do anything real, you had to write assembly language. There was actually one of my neighbors from when I was a kid, and the building I lived in was there. And I don't know why he was into it, but there were a lot of kids. Well, there was a high school called Stuyvesant High School, which is like where the smartest kids in New York go in public school. They're more graduates, more science, science scholarships come from that school than any other school in Manhattan. So there were a lot of kids from there. And people that were trying to do something with the Apple computer that were, BASIC was just impossible, because you had to, this was line number BASIC, which means that, if you wrote the program, line 10 is this line, 11 is this line, 12 is that, and you want to put something in the middle, you had to renumber the whole program instead of make a gap.
Right.
And then you had to recalculate. So you wrote programs that was like line 10 is this, the next instruction would be 20, 30, 40, 50, just so you'd have some space in case you wanted to add more things. So it was pretty difficult to build anything. We used, there was Pascal, which I didn't really care for too much. And then there was this environment called Forth that we used. I used for one game, for one educational title, which was very cryptic. It was sort of like more cryptic than Perl was cryptic. So it was a stack-based architecture. I think PostScript is basically Forth. The PostScript in the printers is basically Forth. So so those are the languages that were used at the time. But really, if you really were going to do anything serious, you wrote an assembly language, which was rough because in 6502 assembly language you had no multiplication instruction, and you only had 8 bits, of indexing. So you had to write your own multiplication routines, your own division routines. They gave you addition and subtraction. Thank you very much. And you were writing. You were at a compiled debug was just took a long time to do anything. So, but a lot of cool games got done. A lot of they wrote. I mean, I think they wrote Doom for Apple. I mean, a lot of great things got done in 6502 assembly.
Oh yeah, certainly.
It was very efficient and very and relatively fast. So it was fun.
Nice. How did you end up at Scholastic doing educational titles for the Apple II?
Right. So let's see. How did that happen? Oh yeah. So my friend Paul DeMarinis, I believe, knew this woman named Debbie who worked at Scholastic. And Scholastic was run by a guy named, I forgot his name now, but he was very progressive. He was very into computers, and he got burned constantly. They never really made any money at it, but Scholastic had, a fair amount of money and a lot of eyeballs. And so we worked there. We all sort of, as a group, let's see, it was myself, Carrie, Chris McQuilkin, Mark didn't join us. Yeah, about 3 of us went there, and we were building educational titles. We had when we were at Atari, we had an original Lisa computer, which was pretty cool. And the reason I say that is because at Scholastic, we then had an opportunity to write for this new machine, this Apple IIc machine, which was it was like the Apple II. It had more memory. It was much smaller. It was like the first laptop that you would imagine with no display, but it was a small computer. You see all the Steve Jobs influence of really really industrial engineering the cases, and they were also coming out with a dye sublimation printer, which means that it was a color printer, and the way it worked was there was a ribbon that was like a piece of cellophane that had dye, red, green, or yellow, magenta, and cyan dye in it, and you would run it once on one color, and then you'd back up and you'd go over it again and over it again. So we wrote a print driver for that, and then we started making games that kids would use for printing out colorful pictures and using that printer. So I'd say the best thing was we got to go to the in 1984 we went to the Apple release party for it, and it's one of these big Steve Jobs staged events, and the way it worked was everyone had every 4 chairs there was one of us in there, and we had one of these devices under our chairs, and at a certain point in the presentation, Steve Jobs said some word, and we all went under our seats, grabbed the Apple IIc, and sort of handed it to the person next to us for them to look at. Sort of like a way of making it seem spectacular, like Jobs would always do.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that, and then this was I still have the mugs from the event. They gave away coffee mugs, and I still have them.
Nice.
um, and but this was the day that there was an earthquake in Southern California.
The Northridge earthquake?
No, I don't remember the name. It was September of 1984 Earth. I don't know. It's not here. But there was an earthquake in that period of time. And it was about 20, 30 miles away from us in San Francisco. And I was standing there with a guy named Chris Cerf. His father was Bennett Cerf, the owner of Random House or something like that. We were involved with the Children's Television Workshop at the time. So I think he was working at Children's Television Workshop, and I was at Scholastic. And we're both New Yorkers. And all of a sudden, we were in the bottom of the Moscone Center, and we feel this sort of rumbling under our feet. And then people start, screaming, and we look up, and there are these windows way above us, and they're sort of oscillating. And Chris and I look at each other and say, "So what's the subway passing underneath? What's going on?"
Nice.
Oh, an earthquake. So that was the earthquake. No, it must have been 80. It must have been 83 that it happened, because the Mac came out in 84.
Right.
So, I don't know. We had a lot of interesting things. We worked with Children's Television Workshop. They had saw the filming of Fraggle Rock, and they had this place called The Mansion, which was a big townhouse in Manhattan where they filmed the Muppets. And we worked with them a bunch of times with different game titles about something called Fraggle Rock, which was.
Remember that show?
Yeah. So saw stuff like that.
And these were Scholastic titles or CTW titles?
They were. Well, we were sort of trying to cooperate with them. We wrote Success with Reading, Success with Typing,
right,
and another one involving Fact and Fiction, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Fact and Fiction Toolkit. Yeah, it was that was the graphics one. The one where you got to use the color printer. And I think again, nothing from CTW got released from us. So
I have a story for you about Success with Reading.
Yeah.
There's a guy on Twitter. He goes by the name 4am, and he hacks Apple II software that has never been cracked before.
Really?
Back in the day, pirates pirated everything, but they pirated the fun. They pirated games. That's what they wanted, and nobody pirated Success with Reading. Yeah, educational titles and the dentist office. Software for, and
Right.
A lot of education. So Success with Reading was cracked for the first time in January, 3 months ago. Yeah.
So it was the I remember it was the spiral tracks on the disc. So they had this software that would write sort of squiggly tracks on the disc. So instead of there being concentric circles, they sort of would move the head of the drive as it was booting. And then if you didn't have that special drive, you couldn't. We had to have a special drive to write the tracks, and then only the regular Apple drives could only read the tracks. It couldn't write them somehow. So that's how they put the copy protection between the tracks. I don't remember. It was something. I remember we had this toolkit, and we had to write a couple of hooks to call their routines, and that was it. We didn't have to deal with them beyond.
So the copy protection, was it from a third-party developer?
So there was a third-party developer who developed a special drive and a an assembly language toolkit that we included, and somehow these spiral tracks were written to the disk, and only the disk drives at the manufacturers could reproduce them. But a regular Atari drive,
Apple Drive, yeah.
couldn't reproduce those tracks, so there was no possibility of copy protection.
Right.
But an Apple Drive could read the tracks. So
super.
That was the whole bit.
Anyway, I guess the end story is that the copy protection worked because it held for 35 years or something ridiculous.
Wow. Yeah, it was because of the hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. I remember when the Mac came in, that was like, we had a lot of Macs, and they were like trying to figure out what they could do with them. With only 128K, there was not much we could use them for. But we were using those at Scholastic too. What else? We had a good time. We had a good time working with Scholastic. They were a nice place to land. They were very interested in new media and wanted to see what would happen. I'd say that they envisioned a lot more than we could actually produce. But for a while I got, up until a couple of years ago, I got royalty statements from them. So
wow. What do you do today?
So after Scholastic, I did a bunch of different things, but eventually I wound up on Wall Street, which is a very big employer in New York. I went to work for many different brokerage firms and banks, and so I kind of switched careers. I started working in the banking environment, the trading environment. So I worked at Credit Suisse, Bear Stearns, Morgan Stanley, all of these big firms. Oh, and here's a story I'll share with you. So my office mate then, Mark Hahn, and I made a pact that if we ever got old and we're working at a bank, the other one was going to come find us and just shoot us to do us a favor. So now I'm sort of looking over my shoulder for when's Mark going to come find us?
Tell me, Mark's like a hippie living on a commune today, right?
Yeah. Well, he's living in New Paltz, I think. So, so my friend Paul DeMarinis and I always joke about that. Who also was my sound engineer at Atari. So now, so I worked in the brokerage environment for a while. I started doing a lot of consulting, different banks. Around 2000, I wound up at the New York Stock Exchange talking to them about how wireless computers could be used, because we had a startup in '96 that involved wireless modems and microcomputers, sort of like a template, a pad, like it's sort of like an iPad today. They were sort of tablet-based computers with pens, and we hooked them up to wireless modems, and we delivered stock quotes and graphs and allow you to trade on them. So, so I was a wireless developer in '95, so then I did some other prototyping. I made something that was called Common Desk. It was sort of like Google Docs and Dropbox, and I managed to. A friend of mine saw it, and we brought it to the CTO of the New York Stock Exchange, and he wanted to sell it to listed companies. So at the Stock Exchange, they sort of have a difficult balance of dealing with providing value and also keeping everyone on the straight and narrow and not allowing any of the listed companies to run afoul of any of the regulations. So we had sold Common Desk. I sold Common Desk to them to sort of act as a listed company executives and their traders, their floor traders, to sort of communicate and use sort of a brokered information flow. So one would say, well, our stock's doing this, and the other would say, well, it's because of we announced this sort of earnings thing. And all that needed to be sort of recorded so they didn't give the traders any more information to sort of bias the traders in any way. So that's what we had sold the New York Stock Exchange. And then this funny thing called 9/11 happened. And so I had an office down there, and I remember someone instant messaging me and saying, I had to get in there at 11 or so. So I was like, just woken up, and someone instant messaged me and said, hey, look out your window. And I looked out my window, and I saw the trade centers. And then I said, oh, my God, if this is a terrorist attack and the World Trade Center is target 1, then the New York Stock Exchange is target 2. Mm-hmm. I'm not going down there.
Yeah.
And so then I got into this legal compliance field with BlackBerry. So basically all the stuff that's going on now between Apple and the Justice Department was something that we had built software for 10 years ago. We were capturing messages on BlackBerry devices, but this was not like we were trying to hack the traders. We were just trying to. There are government regulations that say that that brokerage firms have to record all the messages that a trader makes. So there were some, the good traders, well, they would just be, telling their husbands and wives to remember to bring home milk. But the bad traders were trying to use this as a back channel to do illegal trades.
Wow.
So our software sort of stopped that. So it monitored all the different messaging types on the BlackBerry. And so we were sort of like hacking for good. We were on the good side of the hack. We were trying to stop bad stock traders from defrauding their companies. And so we ran that. So I ran that business for about 10 years. Still have a couple customers left, but because of BlackBerry's foolishness, the business is sort of ending. Common Desk to do compliance is sort of ending. But now what we're doing now is we're working on some through that compliance work that we were doing. We got friendly with Symantec, who has some email archiving systems, and so they have petabytes of. These companies have tons and tons of old emails that they have to archive, and now they want to access them on mobile devices. So we have an email client that accesses that, and now we're trying to make we see companies, we see users having using Outlook for their email, and desktop clients to access their email, but they're sort of now expect to do exactly the same thing on a mobile device. So you need other tools to do that. So we're building, advanced tools that automatically file messages and allow you to slice and dice your inbox and search, many years back for messages that are obviously not stored on the device, but stored on systems behind the corporate firewall. And so that's what we're doing now. And we're looking for new cool things to do. That's sort of a bread and butter project to make money, but we're always looking for new interesting things to do. I would not say as interesting as making video games, but things that sort of make money and are, interesting and cutting edge. So.
Nice. Well, I think I have what I need, Mitch. This is great. Thank you.
Well, great. I'm going to start listening to some of your podcasts.
Great. I hope you enjoy them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.